And we are recording and streaming on Tuesday, February 4th, 2025 at 4:38 p.m. Eastern Time. Kirstin has not been on here before, but Dr. Biss has been on here a couple times before, and Dr. Hatfill has been on here many times before. And you can find the link to his book, 3 Seconds Till Midnight, in the description. But
It's a
today
new
we're
one.
and you do have a new one, yeah. And I think we talked about the 3 seconds or minutes till no 3 seconds till midnight last time. I don't think we've done the new one yet, but I know that today I'm handing it over to you because this may be a shock to people, but I'm not a doctor and I'm not here to talk about anything academic. But I know Dr. Hatfill is, so I'm handing it over to you, sir. Dr. Hatfill, please take it away.
I'll get it started, but I'm not going against my two colleagues.
Fair enough.
They're tougher than me. So, what we're going to talk about is obviously in the female reproductive sphere, and the fact that um, after much legal action, some of the top epidemiologists in the country managed to get a hold of the clinical trials, which were supposed to have been released to the public at the time the EUA was granted for the messenger RNA vaccines for COVID-19. It was three of them, very top guys, very smart guys, when they went over the data, their summary was that from the very start, these vaccines, from the clinical trials, it showed a hidden negative risk to benefit ratio. In other words, it was more dangerous to get one of the messenger RNA vaccines for COVID than it was to actually catch COVID and be hospitalized with shortness of breath. Not and the fact that we had two safe and highly effective drugs that you could take by tablet that cost only pennies, hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin. The EUA never should have been authorized, and not one person should have ever taken these vaccines. Um, when the data was reanalyzed, none of these clinical trials ever showed the messenger RNA vaccines to have any ability to prevent infection, or if you were infected, to prevent you transmitting your infection to someone else, or to prevent less severe disease. The data wasn't there. It also went unrecognized because of the huge failures by the FDA and the CDC to properly supervise these vaccine manufacturers. It went completely unrecognized that the spike protein, which was the key messenger RNA code that was being put into the vaccines, the key for your immune system to mount an early immune response, the purpose of giving the vaccines, that protein started to be generated by your own body's cells uncontrollably for months. And no one ever bothered to check if this protein was safe or not. They thought it was a receptor for the virus to help it enter human cells, when in fact it's a highly biologically active molecule and toxic in its very own right. And this means that this thing, once you get the vax, it sits in your body, unregulated production for days and days and days, and it's able to exert some very harmful, um, adverse, or even lethal side effects, um, just like uncontrollably. And we've seen this in a lot of the long COVID patients that this vaccine is being, but it's matching the long COVID patients from the natural infection. And it's even worse because it's I can't describe. There's over 4,000 papers now showing different types of vaccine harm. And the big take home point was the vaccine preparations that were given during the clinical trials was not what Americans got. They got a different preparation that was very, very highly contaminated with extraneous foreign DNA. And there was a lot variability, batch to batch variability in the manufacturing. And we don't know if some of these people were getting overdoses of the vaccine or what, because this thing wasn't that stable once it was made. Remember, it had to be kept at like minus 70.
Mhm.
And just should we have tried to develop a vaccine? Yes. But it was with the understanding that this would be very carefully monitored. I mean, extremely carefully monitored. And that did not happen. Under the Biden administration, then it became mandated that you had to have it if you wanted to earn a living for a vast swath of society. Then the airlines got on board. They didn't have the rule to say, well, you had to be vaccinated. They jumped on board. Air traffic controllers, they wouldn't, a lot of them wouldn't take it. Now we have an air traffic controller shortage and mid-air collisions at our national airport.
Mhm.
So it was just ridiculous. I watched from the front row seat in the White House. I was Peter Navarro's medical advisor. And, they handed it over to FEMA during the Biden administration, and that was just a complete disaster. There was no remdesivir, even though it didn't work, there wasn't any to give anyone. And 62 million doses of hydroxychloroquine sat in the national stockpile unused. So I've never seen a debacle like this anywhere in my life. And then they started extending the age groups down to children. And I've never seen anything like this. And we talk about this in the book. It's called Unmasked. It's at the printers now.
Dr. Biss.
Yeah, so I have a slide presentation if I can share my screen.
Yes, ma'am. There you go.
Can you see that?
Yes, ma'am.
All right, how do I get slideshow? Okay. So I'm going to address fertility issues with this vaccine. And in a nutshell, this is me. Basically, I've been in private practice since 1998. General OBGYN, boots on the ground. Never in my wildest dreams would I ever have wanted to do any podcasting or research, etc. But somehow COVID threw me into that, and I'm glad it did. Met some wonderful people around the globe. Sadly, I have to state that I'm speaking on my own behalf, and I don't represent my employer nor the hospital on which I'm in good standing. So I just wanted to kind of remind everybody the risk of COVID infection with regards to the infection fatality rates that Neil Ferguson had predicted were vastly overstated. Johnny Anitas did a study looking at 31 countries during 2020 and recalculated the infection fatality rates. So that's his statistics all the way on the right of that slide. And if you look at children, for example, like Dr. Hatfill brought up, what that percentage means that the risk of a child dying of COVID and Dr. Ioannidis's age group spanned all the way to 19 years of age, was 3 out of a million would die if they got COVID infection. And probably those 3 that died would have been sick with other comorbidities. that also includes our college-age students, which still to this day, there are colleges and universities in our country that are mandating their students be up to date with their vaccination. My age group in my practice would, span from roughly the 20 to the 40 years of age. So even those patients are at very low risk of, getting COVID infection and dying from COVID. And I will tell you, in year 2020, I didn't have any maternal deaths in my practice, nor did I know of any in my community. I was chief of staff of my particular hospital at that time, but we had meetings with other physicians in the community, and I would have been aware if there was a lot of maternal death at that time. Excuse me. This is the category of drugs that the FDA has for practitioners to reference, and I would most definitely say that these messenger RNA injections should be classified as category X. None of these particular vaccines were studied on animals prior to the rollout to people. However, previous trials with other messenger RNA products, there were, deaths of the animals, et cetera. So I would definitely state that these would be considered category X. There's two drugs in our history of obstetrics that we should have remembered before we ever would have thought of giving a novel genetic and vaccine to a pregnant patient. The first would be DES, or diethylstilbestrol, which was prescribed to prevent miscarriage. It didn't do that, but instead what it caused was harm to the offspring to women, putting them at much increased risk for various malignancies, but especially cervical cancer. And we're now finding that the offspring of the offspring are actually at increased risk for malignancy, so a multi-generational problem. The other drug was thalidomide, which was marketed for morning sickness. And fortunately, at the time, we had somebody with some ethics in the FDA, because Francis Kelsey prevented this from being prescribed in our country. However, it was prescribed in others and caused many fetal deaths, but those fetuses that did survive had many birth defects, most commonly of limb, and they were known as the flipper babies. And just a side note, this drug has been rebranded to treat multiple myeloma. It costs probably 1 to 2 cents a pill to make. And of course, it costs the multiple myeloma patient, tens of thousands of dollars a month, and it doesn't work. Yeah, because that's what we do. So I just wanted to show the timeline for the use of these injections in pregnant women. So back in December of 2020 was when Pfizer was holding their original trials, and this was the results were published in the New England Journal of Medicine at the end of that month. The granting of the emergency use authorization was basically based on the results of this trial. Tony Fauci got up on stage and said, "Great news, we have a vaccine. It's 95% effective." However, he was not quoting the correct statistic. The statistic is that should have been quoted, and the FDA says you have to quote, was the absolute risk reduction, which means, doctor, if I take this injection, how much am I preventing myself from getting this infection or disease? And that wasn't even 1%. It was 0.84% was what you were preventing from getting COVID. So that was a lie when we were told that it was 95% effective. That's just a bunch of other information on that slide. But basically, like Dr. Hatfill had mentioned, you were more likely to be harmed by the injection than if you would have gotten the infection itself. So what happened was it was granted emergency use. There were several phases of people that were receiving these injections. The first was the first responders. ACOG, or American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, was relying on the advisory committee on immunization practices guidelines. So they weren't coming out and telling anybody to get these injections, but they were letting the government do that. Some of the first responders that received these injections, of course, were women, and some of them were pregnant, and the aftermarket data that Pfizer was supposed to provide to everybody. However, we had to obtain this data through Freedom of Information Act and didn't get it until the following year. But our CDC had this information, and this was made available at the end of February of 2021. And it showed 1,223 deaths, and it also showed 270 women did get pregnant or were pregnant when they received these injections. However, only 32 were followed up with. And out of those 32, 26 had miscarried. So that's an 81% miscarriage rate, which should have been a red flag right there. Some will argue, well, what if the rest of the pregnancy women had been followed up with? Even so, that would have been still a 9 to 10% miscarriage rate, and a normal miscarriage rate is only 5 to 6%. Rochelle Walensky knew this information and had this data when she did an audio recording for the New England Journal of Medicine. And she said on that recording in April that these are safe and effective for pregnant women based on what data? These women were not enrolled in the Pfizer trial. You were not allowed to be pregnant. Men were told to abstain from intercourse if you have sex. Make sure you wear 2 condoms and your partner is on a form of birth control. They did not want women getting pregnant during these trials. So we had no study data. And if anything, we had negative information from the aftermarket data. And yet she stood there and stated that they were safe and effective in pregnant women. We've come to find out through FOIA requests, Maggie Thorpe, Dr. Thorpe's wife, found out that a trust funneled money through HHS was provided money to various entities such as the sports entities, the media, Hollywood, the medical agencies, our boards, etc. ACOG received somewhere between $11 to $13 million in April of 2021 to market these injections as safe and effective to women. In June of 2021, the infamous Shimabukuro article came out in the New England Journal stating that these were safe, that the miscarriage rate was 13%. That was normal, which it's not. I've already said it's probably, almost 3 times the normal rate. But the math was tricky in the article. Somebody read the article very closely, looked at the tables, sent a letter to the editor and said, no, actually, your data shows that the miscarriage rate is 82%. However, the article has yet to be retracted. In July of that year was when the official statements came out from ACOG and the Society for Maternal Fetal Medicine, stating that these are safe and effective, and every woman who is pregnant, thinking of getting pregnant, or breastfeeding should take these injections. Again, based on there was no safety data. If anything, it was still negative. And then the following month, the Comirnaty, the Pfizer product, Comirnaty, was FDA approved. That was a lot of, word salad and ammunition for the media to make the lay public think that this was now FDA approved, was no longer emergency use, and all the other products were safe. But nobody in this country received Comirnaty. They received the emergency use authorized product, because had they received Comirnaty and suffered an injury, Pfizer would have been liable. So that's the timeline. If you go on the ACOG website today, this is still the guidance. They are still recommending that you get these vaccines. They're safe and effective, and you should get them if you're breastfeeding and you're going to protect your baby, even with all the data that's been, published thus far. In the beginning, the Japanese obtained this through FOIA, but this is the Pfizer rat trials showing that the lipid nanoparticles, which is the fatty envelope that surrounds the messenger RNA in these injections, goes everywhere in the body, but particularly concentrates highly in endocrine glands and most in the ovaries of the rats. And that's a concern. Why is that a concern? Because when females are developing in the womb, we develop all the eggs we're ever going to have once we reach 22 weeks, a little bit over halfway through the pregnancy. We start out with about 7 million eggs. That reduces to 1 to 2 million at the time of birth. And by puberty, we're down to 300,000. When those eggs run out, that's what menopause is. And that's usually about the age of 51, 52. They don't regenerate. We're born with whatever we're going to have. So if these lipid nanoparticles are getting in the ovaries, what does that possibly mean for that developing girl? Is she going to go through puberty? Is she going to have infertility? And my concern, like diethylstilbestrol, is that this may be a multi-generational problem, especially now that we know through Kevin McKernan and others that have confirmed his findings that there's also DNA in these vaccines, and could that somehow incorporate into the eggs of the ovary as well as the sperm? This is a study out of Israel showing that not only did the sperm count, but the sperm motility decrease in men that received 3 doses of the Pfizer product. That was only studied up till 125 days. That doesn't mean it didn't last beyond that time frame. It just wasn't studied. We also sadly have lost Dr. Arne Burkhardt, but he was a pathologist in Germany, and he studied several people's tissues that died shortly after they received the Comirnaty or Pfizer products. This is a slide of a male's testes, and basically all the brown in that slide is staining spike protein. Basically that's all that's there, and there was very little sperm. And this was 134 days after the man received the Comirnaty injection. He passed away. These are 2 studies, both done by the same authors. The second was to confirm the first with different test subjects, but showed fully intact messenger or vaccine RNA in human breast milk. They also looked at the fact that when some of these babies that breastfed, they had reactions, and that kind of shows us that this could possibly survive the gut because they ingested the breast milk and then they had reactions from the vaccine RNA. So that's a concern, considering they want to start putting that in our food and the livestock. This is from our vaccine adverse event reporting system, our VAERS data. This showed a bunch of reports filed for babies that had reactions after they breastfed when their moms had been vaccinated. The first one, death, I find that a little concerning because in my 30 years of practice and taking care of 8,000 plus pregnant women, I've never had a woman come in my office and tell me that her baby died because she breastfed. That's a problem. This article came out last year showing fully intact vaccine RNA in umbilical cords and placentas in babies, which is concerning. We kind of sort of knew this would happen, but this proves that it does not stay in the woman's arm. This goes all the way to the baby if it's in the umbilical cord. So that's a problem, but these authors were actually excited about that. This is another slide from Dr. Burkhardt. This is from, sadly, a woman who had a stillbirth at 37 weeks. She had received her Comirnaty injections before she was even pregnant. This brown in this slide this is a placental tissue slide, but all the brown is stained spike protein. So, this would have been 8 months, 9 months after she had received these injections, and yet she was still producing spike, and it was all throughout her placenta. This is just a very busy slide, but basically addresses the fact that DNA from plasmids is found in the vaccine vials. Like Dr. Hatfill had discussed, the trial participants received the vaccines The RNA was made using a PCR technology. Everybody around the globe, because this had to be made very quickly, received vaccinated RNA made by what we now call phase 2. But this was using plasmid DNA to make the RNA, which is fine as long as you get the DNA out of the final concoction, and that is not what happened. There was not only DNA, but also E. coli and a lot of other things that shouldn't have been there. This is a very busy slide. This is Dr. Thorpe's slide that he shows in a lot of his presentations, but this basically just addresses the aftermarket, Pfizer aftermarket statistics on the pregnancy and breastfeeding babies. This is the Tom Shimabukuro article that basically shows the correct math and how their miscarriage rate was not 13%, but over 80%. This was my data that I presented to Marjorie Taylor Greene's informal hearing in November 2023. This is from Jessica Rose's Substack. Basically, I had been tracking my newly entering obstetric patients and my miscarriage rates from 2020 up till the end of 2022. And in this picture, the blue bars represent the newly entering first trimester pregnant women. So you can see from year to year that goes down, which is probably a reflection of either early pregnancy loss or infertility. And the orange bars represent the miscarriage rates in my practice. In 2020, my miscarriage rates were normal at 4% on average per month, and then they went up by 100% each year after that. So in 2021, the average rate was 7 to 8% per month. They peaked that year in November, which is probably a reflection of when my patients were getting the boosters. And then in 2022, it doubled again to 15%. Now that was up till November of 2022. In December of that year, I had 41 newly registered patients and 13 of them miscarried. So that was a 27% miscarriage rate. And then in January and February of 2023, my miscarriage rate was 30%. And it didn't go back down again until June and July of that year. And that's a little concerning because the majority of my patients received their vaccinations in 2021. Most of them had 3 injections. Very few had 4 or more. 80% of those were Pfizer. The remainder were Moderna, and I can count on one hand how many received J&J. So the concern is they received the injections in 2021. However, we were still seeing miscarriages in 2022 and then rolling into 2023. This is a slide, it's old, but it would look very similar if you pulled it up today. This is from the Open VAERS website that takes the VAERS data and puts it into graphs. VAERS will combine both miscarriage and stillbirth, so it's not just miscarriages. But you can clearly see in 2021 the spike in complaints of miscarriages. And people will say that, well, that's because so many more people received COVID injections as compared to any other vaccine. And that's clearly not the case because this goes back to 1990 and women had been receiving influenza vaccines for prior to 1990, and many more flu vaccines have been provided in that time period than COVID injections have been. These are some other issues that occurred during pregnancy after the rollout of the injections, which women were told they would have issues with if they got COVID infections. However, I didn't see these problems in 2020. 2020, we had the most deliveries we've had yet to date, and I didn't see these issues increase with frequency until 2021. So preeclampsia and gestational hypertension is high blood pressure in pregnancy. Oligohydramnios is low amniotic fluid around the baby. Both of those issues are due to an abnormally functioning placenta. Postpartum hemorrhages or bleeding after delivery is through the roof. I mean, if there's some way we could study the blood bank distribution of blood to maternity wards throughout the country, I'm sure we would see an increase in the blood bank usage. Dr. Thorpe has reported on the increase in stillbirths in certain parts of our country, Canada and Scotland. And he's also seen increased malformations. And then also I saw an increase in early, water breakage, which is what PPROM means, and preterm labor. This is an article, Dr. Thorpe is the lead author, but I'm also one of the authors, that what we did was we looked at 35 adverse pregnancy events that would be reported to VAERS. And we looked at the events reported with the COVID vaccines, with influenza vaccines given way back to 1990, and then all vaccines, because there are other vaccines that pregnant women receive. And what we did, I'll show you what the table looks like. So if you look at the top left, miscarriage, so that 3494 number is the amount of women who reported a miscarriage to VAERS after they received a COVID injection. And that's over a 40-month period of time by the time we publish the study. The 315 number is from influenza vaccines going all the way back to 1990. And then the 936 would be representative of all vaccines given back to 1990, excluding the COVID injections. So if you do a proportional reporting ratio, which I can't explain because I'm not a statistician, but basically if you look at the middle column next to miscarriage, what that 114 number means is if you get a COVID vaccine, you're 114 times more likely to miscarry than if you get a flu vaccine. And we did those ratios for all the adverse events that we listed in that table. I bring this up in a lot of my slide decks because this is published in the ACOG journal, and this was published back in 2007. It was an article on medical ethics. Find that funny considering ACOG hasn't been very ethical in what they've done. But one thing I've highlighted here is that there was definitely no informed consent when our patients receive these injections, and when anybody really around the world received them. But, pregnant women were not told the risks. They were told these were safe and effective, and they're still today told they're safe and effective, and they're still today told if you get COVID, you're going to get very sick, you're going to die, your baby's going to die. And again, those numbers are very small. And I just think that's a huge travesty. Why are we seeing these miscarriages and the increase in fertility? We don't know. That's what we want to look and study. But there are some theories that were brought up very early on and some concerns. Dr. Sukar at Bhakti was very concerned in the beginning because the spike protein that these shots make your body make, you will then develop antibodies to these proteins. And the proteins are very similarly found in the layer of the embryo, which is called the syncytial trophoblast. And that is, as the embryo is traveling down to implant in the uterus, that is the layer that's around it. And if you're making antibodies to the spike, it's possible that you could make antibodies to these embryos and then the woman will miscarry. We know that the lipid nanoparticles in the spike protein cause inflammation, and nothing with pregnancy is good if there's inflammation. There's also an endocrine component because we know that these products get in endocrine glands such as the ovaries and the testes and probably the pituitary. And very early on, when women were receiving these injections, we saw a lot of menstrual disorders. There could be some clotting issue at the level of the endometrium because we know that these cause clots. So there might be microclotting and, the endometrial lining is not able to support the implanting embryo. We now know that there's DNA in these vials, so there could possibly be some DNA integration causing abnormalities in the embryos. And then Jessica Rose had published in 2022 that the spike protein may bind to estrogen receptors, so that may cause some issues as well. None of this has been proven, but those are just theories at this point. So that is the end of my slide deck. Sorry, it's not very uplifting, Tommy. I know
I
you
was
don't like
gonna,
it.
no, I was gonna say it was enjoyably horrifying, as most of these COVID episodes I do are. Just kind of sit here, just going, just slide after slide, just Jesus Christ, Jesus Christ, just yeah, it's but kind of nothing else to do but go forward. But Kirsten, do you want to take it over?
Yeah, I would love to. Thanks again for having me as a first-time attendee on the TPC podcast. It's so nice to be here. Thank
Yes,
you.
ma'am.
Kirsten Cosgrove. I am a
Kirsten, yeah.
longtime clinical researcher. And before I talk about Advanced Biological Research Group, which the three of us are a part of, I just wanted to go back a little bit to the Pfizer trial and highlight some points about that. So, you know, it's very evident in their post-market clinical trial protocol. It's 146 pages, and it's very evident that there's a lot of content in that protocol about the reproductive system and getting pregnant within that trial. So much so that, you know, to what Dr. Biss had mentioned, the contact. So being exposed to the study drug, they even went to so far as to define that as EDP, exposure during pregnancy, and that even included through inhalation and skin contact. And if it was noted that that occurred in the trial, the study investigator was supposed to report that to Pfizer safety within 24 hours, which is, you know, I mean, that's a big indicator. They were supposed to not have filled out one but two forms, a serious adverse event form, and they even had a form dedicated to EDP. So, you know, I think that's really important to note that there was a lot throughout the entire protocol relating to reproductive health. The other thing about this trial is that, you know, just from start to end, it's just a mess. There's just so much wrong with it. And, you know, as Dr. Biss stated, I'm sure that you're so well versed in this subject, Tommy, that you probably already know that the control placebo group was decimated because they gave them the study drug as well. But also, you know, to the monitoring and the reporting in this study. A study of this magnitude and stature should have had highly rigorous monitoring methods incorporated. And so there's something called a CRA, which that's what I am. It's a clinical research associate, also called a monitor. And they're the boots on the ground in a study trial. So the monitors go to the clinical sites, they review what's called a case report form, and that's the study form that the information gets entered onto, and then that goes into the study database. Well, monitors go to the site, they look through subjects, and once a patient is consented into a trial, they go from patient to subject. So once they go through and they look through all of, sometimes not every single subject that's in that trial, but a fair amount of them, so that they can at least get a good flavor of how the study is being conducted in that particular site. But the whole point is to confirm that site is conducting the study in adherence with the protocol. And so they will sit down, and we sit down for hours, and we look through medical charts and all of the EMR records, and we compare it back to what they've reported to the sponsor to make sure that the sponsor is getting the information that they're supposed to, that the information that they are getting is accurate, and that they're running the trial in adherence. Well, if they aren't, then those things are called protocol deviations and violations. And so then at that point, the monitor is supposed to, you know, write those up, submit those to the sponsor. The sponsor helps, you know, in conjunction with the monitor, helps follow up on trying to at least address those if they can. Well, we know that didn't happen to the extent that it should have, because Pfizer whistleblower Brooke Jackson, she had a long list of protocol deviations and violations that she was begging for Pfizer to take a look at and say, okay, these need addressed. We need to draw attention to these. And when she was getting nowhere with that, she took it to the FDA and she was fired that day. So you can't tell me that the monitoring was held to the level that it should have been. You know, and it even goes down to, there's a report called the pregnancy and lactation cumulative review document. And it's an 8-page document. It was published in early 2021, and it has a listing of adverse events specifically related to pregnancy, miscarriage, et cetera. And in these tables, there are 3 columns. One is age, one is medical history, and the other one is pregnancy outcome. Well, in the middle column, which is the medical history, I just looked at it today. Over half of the entries say medical history not reported. So within their inclusion exclusion criteria, which is, one of the major parts of a study protocol that deems if they're even can be reasonably accepted in the study, it says over and over that it's a healthy individual, and that has to be proven via medical history. So they're even in their reporting after the trial that they're going against their own reporting because they didn't even go in alignment with their own inclusion exclusion in the way they're supposed to run the study if they can't even say that they can confirm medical history. So I just did want to highlight some of those things that that your audience may not know about what occurred and the travesty that occurred in objective science and within that trial specifically. So fast forward to today and where we are today. Again, we started an initiative called Advanced Biological Research Group, and some of us have been working together for a little over 2 years now, but we formed a nonprofit late last spring. And we also call it ABRG. And ABRG, we're a small group, but we're fierce and mighty. We're composed of doctors and scientists who are willing to speak out about the risks of the COVID vaccine. And the other members, besides Dr. Hatfill and Dr. Biss and myself, are Dr. Ryan Cole and Dr. James Thorpe. So, the reason why we are highly interested in reproductive research and the effects of the vaccine on what we don't know yet about fertility and all of those unknowns. But we wanted to be poised that, we're constantly being told, well, first of all, no one was doing this research that needed to be done. And especially in the previous administration, we're in a phase of DIY. We have to do all of it ourselves. That includes funding, and that includes sourcing the projects as well. And so we recognize the need, but we also are constantly under attack of, we know that there's an increasing occurrence of spillover from zoonotic pathogens to the human species as well. And so we wanted to be able to put ourselves in a position where we could be ready if there would be some sort of a pathogenic challenge or threat. We wanted to be able to conduct the research quickly, identify that mechanism that's causing the harm, and to be able to come up with targeted treatments and effective therapeutic strategies. So, that's why we created ARBG. We have several different projects that we have in the pipeline that we want to get out there. We can be supported on our website, arbg.org. And you can learn about our current study, and then we're also accepting donations there to help fund the research. But our first study is it's IRB approved, and it's bouncing off of what we've understood over the last few years about all of the menstrual abnormalities that occurred after the rollout of the vaccine. 10-year-old girls starting bleeding, or 85-year-old women coming out of menopause. So we know that was a widespread occurrence, but we also want to understand, what was that mechanism? Why is that? Why did that happen? Why is it happening? What is attacking the reproductive system, and how is that system being attacked? So this study, it's a small pilot study. We're taking tissue samples that have already been collected prior to entry into the study, OBGYN tissue samples that are just in storage, and we're going to have those reviewed pathologically to see if we can get some of those answers. Our next study, we don't have a protocol written up for it or identified yet, but what we would like to study after the pilot study is concluded is to referring to or alluding to what Dr. Biss was talking about is ovarian reserve. We don't know. We don't have the answers if we're going to have grandkids. We don't know the long-term effect of this. I don't know if my sons are going to be able to have kids. I mean, it's and again, hello, bring down the hammer on all of this happy news that we're saying, but we need to find out. So that's the other one that we would like to do as our second project. And then the third arm of this is that we're also trying to start a national campaign of Mothers Against mRNA. We want to bring that nationwide. We want to bring awareness to the damaging effects of this experimental technology on our kids. Especially if they're going to start using it bringing it on into all of the shots and on the childhood immunization schedule. People need to understand about this. And angry, fierce mamas can be heard. We are ticked off. You have a nation of angry moms that we're getting attacked on all sides. We wake up in the morning and we have to worry about not only the vaccines, what they're doing within the vaccines, within the body. We have to worry about the food our kids are consuming. We have to worry about the air quality that our kids are playing at recess at school. We have to worry about the EMF that is higher in this country than it is in other countries. And so, we're just at a point where, especially on this vaccine front, we want to get the word out. And if we can form a coalition, if we can form a big enough group and get enough awareness, we hope that we can have sway over legislators, because I can tell you, they're afraid of us. When angry moms bring out their voices, we can get things done and, hope to go to DC and be on panels, et cetera. So, sorry for that whole long spiel, but that's ABRG. That's what we're trying to do, and yeah, just trying to drum up some support over it.
I mean, it's the only logical move to do in something like the wake of thalidomide or the wake of Pearl Harbor or the wake of 9/11. There are people to blame. You can say, how do we, ignore this, the warning signs, all that. But ultimately, you do hit a point where it's like, okay, but we do have to move forward. We have to find all that, prevent it from happening again, punish those who perpetuated it. But there is also just sort of like the realistic moment of like, man, that sucks. How do we move forward? And like,
Mhm.
it's like, yeah, the Twin Towers are smoldering on the ground. Like, we can do a lot of blaming and find out why that happened, but you got to get some dump trucks. And that's kind of so it's dark, but it's also you do have to move. Like the world that didn't end. Like we're still going forward. There's still another calendar year. I guess we're in February. It doesn't stop. And so to find out,
Caller.
yeah, to find out what happened or to find out what could happen, generations delayed or skipped or yeah, you do have to just kind of start the long process. And it's like, no, it's not fun, but you do have to start that. But Dr. Biss, I think I cut you off.
No, I just wanted, Kirstin forgot to mention our ultimate founder, Dr. McDyer.
Oh my goodness, Dan, I'm so sorry. He's the
Unforgivable.
principal, and he's the
Unforgivable.
principal. I know. Oh, this is going to go down in history. Dan McDyer. Yes, he's actually the principal investigator of our first study. Sorry, Dan.
I'll text him right now and tell him that you left him
I will.
just unforgivable. Yeah, speaking of unforgivable things, it's COVID as well as that.
Yep.
Dr. Biss, any other thoughts?
No, what about you, Steve?
No, the girls gave me strict things that I was going to talk about, and I'm afraid of mama bears.
Okay, fair enough. Fair enough. You're on your good
The
behavior.
thing, the thing is, Tommy, we need accountability here. Not one pandemic plan, not one scenario, war game, anything ever predicted that we would do this to ourselves as a nation. Our federal health agencies would do this to us. There has to be accountability. There has to be penalties. And until this occurs, how do we fix this? We can't. We can put in stopgap measures, but then when that administration's over, it goes right back to the same thing. So, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, It does seem like it's moving in some positive direction. As I believe yesterday and the day before, they started releasing these official documents. They're showing like CIA patents going back to 2019, CIA, BARDA, DARPA, DITRA, all these things, and so there's some traction. It's I don't want to get my hopes up, but it yeah, no, you have to find out why it happened, especially if it happened from within, because it won't matter how many defensive measures you put in place. Kind of, if the call is coming from inside the house, it won't matter how strong the doors are. It's like, hey, this is a measure, this is a feel good measure to make you feel good, but Kevlar vest isn't going to help with a cold kind of thing. So, I agree, and I didn't, it seems like hell's kind of frozen over in the last 2 weeks, just the amount of things happening. So I'd say if there's ever been a time where anything can happen, I'd say it's right now. It's kind of everything's up in the, and I mean that in the best possible way. I'm here for it and I'm psyched for it. Um, Dr. Biss, did you say though that people can go to the link in the description, they can donate? Is it technically a 501(c)(3)? Could you clarify
Yeah.
that?
Yeah, so it's AB as in boy, RG.org. That's the website. And then there is a place where they can go, right, Kirsten? And donate.
Yeah, yeah, you can find out about our first study, of which Dr. Dan McDyer is the principal investigator.
Too little, too late. Too little,
I
too
know,
late.
I know.
You're on the chopping block.
Yeah, you can find out about our current study, and then you can also donate there too.
Okay.
And it is tax deductible.
Yep.
Oh, perfect. Beautiful.
Mhm.
Well, Kirsten, Dr. Biss, Dr. Hatfill, thank you so much for your time. Anytime you guys want to do it again, you're more than welcome to. I love doing it. As depressing as these episodes can be, I think it is objectively important. So I'd be honored to have you guys back on.
Thank you
Thanks
so
for
much.
having us. Yeah.
Thank you so
Thanks,
much.
Tommy.
Yes, sir. Guys, thank you so much for watching. Take